All right, so we'll start here in this blank map, and we'll start adding some of the sample content, starter content rather, so that we can just have some textures to use as a base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add New in the content browser, and then I'm going to go to Add Feature or Content Pack, and I'm going to add a third-person blueprint, and I'll also add starter content. All right, so third-person blueprint and starter content, and I'm going to add that to the project. Okay. The next thing, I'm going to go into materials, and I'm going to find a ground material, something that is just going to give me like a temporary texture on the ground. So I'll grab like cobblestone rough, and I'll just drag that onto the floor. And then I'm going to just take this floor, and I'll create a 3x3 floor plane. Again, just kind of what we usually do, just to give a bit more room to do some test work. And then I'll grab all of both of my lights rather, and I'll set them to movable just to get rid of those edges that are going to be those black edges that are there from the previous lighting bake. Okay, then I'm going to go up here to our lighting modes, and I'm going to switch it from lit to down here, exposure, game settings. I'm going to turn that off so that we don't have the automatic exposure affecting the lights in the scene, because we are going to do a bit of work with volumetric lighting and stuff like that. Okay, so just to recap, I have my starter content, I have the third-person blueprint. I just threw a placeholder material onto the ground, this cobblestone, and created this 3x3 tiled grid, just so that we have some space to run around in. And then I'm going to go into settings, project settings, and I'll set my maps and modes to be the default game mode. I'll switch it from game mode base to third-person game mode, and this is the same thing we do in the beginning of every class. Okay, so I'll just jump in just to make sure that it's all functioning properly. Okay. Good to go?
Are we just turning off game settings, or are we adding something else?
I'm just turning off game settings here. Okay. Good to go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start to look at what a LUT or a lookup table does. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position my camera somewhere in the scene. So you can see I'm just flying the camera to like an angle, similar to this. Okay, so position your camera somewhere in your scene. Right, it doesn't matter really where. You just want to get a good shot of your scene, but whether it's straight on, whether it's on an angle, just something that gives you a good indication of what your colors and your lighting are in your scene. All right, because we're going to be affecting the colors and lighting. Okay. So once I'm in this kind of angle here, I'm gonna hit G to hide all my icons. So G is the toggle for your in-game view. So it basically tries to mimic, you know, what's gonna be hidden in game. All right, so I'm just gonna hit G just to toggle all my icons off. And I'm gonna go up to this little icon here, this little downward arrow. I'm gonna click that. And then I'm gonna hit high resolution screenshot. And then I'm gonna hit this little take a screenshot button. So once I do that, you're gonna see a link pop up on the bottom right. So you can go ahead and click that link and you'll find your screenshot in that link. Okay, so I'm gonna take this screenshot. I'm just gonna copy it and paste it on my desktop. Let's open Photoshop. And I'll actually open that photo in Photoshop, the screenshot that we just took.
We'll just drag it in.
You can just drag it in, yeah.
Photoshop's opening.
So in Unreal here, I'm just gonna close my screenshot tool. So I have my image opened in Photoshop. Yeah, I'll give you guys a couple minutes to open Photoshop. So I have my image here loaded in Photoshop, okay? And again, it doesn't matter if it's at a different angle than mine. We just want to have it a good shot of like the color of your sky, the color of your props in your scene. Just something that is a good representation of your overall scene color. Okay, so once again, look up here, guys. To take a screenshot, click this button here. All right, this button right here. Then you're gonna go to high resolution screenshot. And then you're gonna click the little camera button. Once you see the link pop up on the bottom right, click that link. And then just load one of those pictures in Photoshop. I copied it to the desktop just to kind of, in case we take more screenshots, I wanna know which ones I've actually pulled out of there, but you can just open that file directly if you want. So the next thing that I'm going to want to do, so the next step is I'm going to grab that LUT, so this RGB table, and I'm just going to drag and drop this image into the scene, okay? So once I drop it in, I'm going to hit enter. I don't care exactly where this is. I just want it somewhere in my canvas or on my canvas, okay? So it could be up here in the corner, just as long as it's entirely in your scene, all right, in your Photoshop canvas. So it's up here in the corner, okay? And I have it on the right as a layer. You'll see it on the right as a RGB table 16:1 layer. Okay? So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on adjustment layers down at the bottom here, at the bottom right. Okay, at the bottom right of Photoshop, we have adjustment layers. Have you guys used adjustment layers? It's just at the bottom right of your screen, guys.
Looks like a circle.
So if you guys haven't been using adjustment layers, by the way, adjustment layers is one of the most essential core functions of adjusting your actual document. When you do image adjustments up at the top here, it's a destructive method, meaning once you do a brightness contrast up here, it's baked down into your document, and if you go forward, you can't go back to before that adjustment. If you keep it as an adjustment layer here, this is non-destructive. You can always go back and tweak it, adjust it, okay? So this is where you want to do your adjustments, not up here when you can help it, all right? So I'm going to add a hue saturation. And I just picked hue saturation just because we can do a test with that, and then we can add another couple layers, adjustment layers. So I just want to make sure that this adjustment layer is at the top, all right? Just want to make sure that this adjustment layer is at the top of the document. So if you look here, I have my image, I have my RGB table, and I have my hue saturation. Now this hue saturation, I'm just going to play with the hue value, and I'll also adjust the saturation a little bit. So I'll take my saturation to about 50, and I'll take my hue to something like, let's say, go something like 90. Something that just looks radically different than what you had before, okay? We want to have an obvious change in the actual color palette. So don't worry about what your colors look like as long as it looks different from your original image. And this is going to be our first test. We'll do another iteration of it. So just make sure that this looks different than your original image. Don't try to make something that looks very, very subtle. Do something that's radically different than your original image. Okay? On top of this, I'm going to stack another adjustment layer on top. So I'll add a levels. And I'll adjust the levels a little bit. So I'll just do a bit of an adjustment with the levels. Okay, again, we want something that looks obviously different than what we had before. Okay, so this is what I've got. All right, so we should all be at this state where we have some type of color shift that we're doing. So what I'm going to do, if you look at my screen for a sec, holding control, I'm going to click on, and guys, look, before you do this, I'm going to click on the icon, not the layer, the icon on the layer, and that's going to automatically select my RGB table. Okay, so look again, look up here, look up here. Holding control, I click on the icon on the layer, which is going to automatically select the contents of that layer. Okay? After I do that, I'm going to go up to Image, Crop. So you'll notice that once you did the crop, you should still have your two adjustment layers sitting on top of your RGB table. Now I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'll save this on my desktop as a PNG. And I'm going to call this RGB table 16:1 underscore new. Okay, just use all the default settings when you save. So save it again as a PNG. Make sure it's a PNG. All right, you're going to name it RGB table 16:1 new. So that's not a PNG there. Yeah, there you go. All right, so after I save it, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to Control Z a couple times just to get back to this state. So I use the crop just so that I can save out. And now I get back to this state where I can continue to modify this if I want later, okay? And I'll show you how we do that. So if I jump back into Unreal for a sec. So in the content folder, I'm going to right click and create a new folder, and I'll call this sample content. And in this sample content folder, I'm going to hit import. And I'm going to find that file on the desktop called RGB table 16:1 underscore new. And I'll import that RGB table. Then I'll double click on that RGB table. All right, so once we do that, we're going to notice there's some artifacts on this image. So we need this image to be uncompressed. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to texture group here, where it says world, and I'm going to find color lookup table. color lookup table, and it's going to get rid of all the compression. And then I'll hit save at the top left. So right here, color lookup table. And then I'm going to hit save. Yeah, so find color lookup table.
Not there.
It's supposed to.
It's right here.
It's not alphabetical.
Oh.
Do you know why?
Reasons. All right, then I'm going to go into the modes panel on the left. If your level doesn't have a post, so you're going to want to actually just check your outliner here, your world outliner. Just type post. You're going to want to just confirm that your level doesn't actually have a post process. If you created a new map, it shouldn't have a post by default. So in the search classes on the left, I'm going to type post, and I'm going to drag in a post process volume. Okay. So with that post process selected, I'm going to scroll down on the right side with that post process selected, and I'm going to get to a section near the bottom here where it says post process volume settings, and I'm going to click this button for infinite extent unbound. Okay. So basically what that is, and I've explained this before, but just to recap, what that does is you don't have to be in that post-process volume for it to affect the world. This basically makes it a global post-process. So it's unbound. The effect is kind of global. Okay. So then I'm going to scroll up to my color grading. I'm going to unroll miscellaneous. And you guys could close your screenshot tool. I'm going to get to the miscellaneous section here. I'm going to click this button to expose the color grading LUT lookup table. And then I'm going to drag this texture into that section. Okay, so you should see here now, you should have your color grade, which matches identically to your Photoshop file. Okay, so you also have this section here, whereas color grading LUT intensity, if I click this button, this is an amount. This is like a scalar. So basically if I go down to 0, it's not going to give me any post-process amount, LUT. If I go to 0.5, it's going to give me half of the effect that I've planned, or 1 is the full effect that I have from my color grade. So the nice thing now that we have our color grade in, okay? So if you look up here, guys, if I go back to Photoshop for a sec, and I grab my hue saturation layer, and I just pull the hue to be, something different. So I just adjust my hue, okay? If I control click that RGB table again, the layer, control click, go to image, crop, file, save as, a PNG, and overwrite that _new that you had before. Just overwrite this file. Okay, so just replace it. Then Control Z to get back to this state. In Unreal, I can right click on my RGB table and hit re-import. Okay, so if you guys are having any issues, I'll come by and take a look. I'm just going to turn off this color grade for a sec, just by clicking this button here. I'm just going to turn this color grade off. Okay, just going to toggle this button off, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you also a bit of the volumetric fog that we can have in the level, all right? So I'm going to take this post-process volume, and because it's unbound, I'm just going to move it you know, out of my way in the scene.
Billy, one question real quick.
Yep.
We know the
Okay, so in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to starter content, and I'll go into architecture, and I'll grab wall window 400 by 300. I'm just going to drag that into the scene. Okay, then I'm going to grab wall 400 by 300, and I'm going to also drag this in. So I'm going to create a little, kind of a little room with it. So I'm just going to create this little enclosure here. All right, and then I'll go into props, and I'll just grab like this little round table, and I'll also grab a couple chairs. Place them in this little room here. So something like this. So as I said, now we're going to be looking at how to turn on some volumetric fog, which is not on in your maps by default, like in the environment. But this is also something that you might want to toggle on and adjust. The volumetric fog is more of a like a PC or it's a heavier effect, so you won't have it by default usually in most games. Like some games will have it, like Red Dead has it. Certain games have the feature that runs fairly well, but this is not on in the maps by default because the maps that you guys are doing the assignment in is made for mobile specifically. So a lot of these features are turned off on that in those maps. Okay, so just something very simple, just this little window and these four meshes total for our structure. So our 2 walls and our 1 ceiling. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to go into our classes on the left side of the screen. All right, so I'm going to go into the class on the left side of the screen, and I'm going to look for something called an exponential height fog. So you're going to find this here just by typing in fog. You're going to find something called an exponential height fog. So I'm going to grab the exponential height fog and just drag it into the scene. Okay, with the height fog selected, in my details on the right, I'm going to type VOL, and I'm going to turn on volumetric fog. Okay, so toggle this little icon here to turn on volumetric fog. All right, clear your search. In fog density here, let's just bump it to like maybe like 0.5. And we're going to adjust this value, but let's just put it to 0.5 for a sec. This is the first value here. It's called fog density. Okay. In my modes panel on the left, I'm going to go into lights, and I'm going to grab a point light, and I'll drag a point light into the scene. Okay. I'm going to set this point light to be movable. All right. I'm going to set the point light to movable. All right, so if I zoom back a bit, you're going to see here this radius volume. Okay, this is the attenuation radius. Okay, so basically, are you guys familiar with how these lights work?
Yeah.
Okay, so this attenuation radius, for those that don't, if you just look up here for a sec, this attenuation radius is the area of influence for the light. So if you have an intensity of 8, this is going from 8 at the center to 0 at the edge of the attenuation radius. So if I turn my radius down, all right, this light is going from 8 to 0 within this radius. So I'm going to take this radius and set it to something like, let's say 250. Something that is big enough for the space in my room here. All right. So also for performance, like when you're working, you only want this light radius to be touching the elements that you actually want to be affected by the light. Even if you want it to be affected by the light in a very small way, you want contact with those objects. Like you see here, this radius is not contacting this wall. So it's actually not going to affect this wall at all. Like you're going to want to have this influence all the areas that you actually want to be affected by that light. In the search here, I'm going to type VOL. I'm going to turn on cast volumetric shadow. And I'm going to take this volumetric scattering intensity and let's go to something like extreme. Let's go to like 80. All right, so you should be seeing an area of influence here with that volumetric fog. So you'll see this like this orb here. Okay, so we can take this scattering intensity now to something a bit lower, like let's say maybe 25 or 10. And I'm going to take this and I'm just going to go back into my light settings. And I'm going to adjust the light color. Okay. So to get a better view of this, I'm just going to move this point light out of my scene for a second. And we'll bring this back in a second. Okay. So let's just take this light and let's move it out of the scene for a second. I'm going to grab a spotlight and I'll drag the spotlight into my scene. And I'm going to take the spotlight and I'm going to angle it into the window. So I'm taking that spotlight and I'm angling it into the window. Okay? In the search here, I'm going to type VOL. And I'm going to turn on cast volumetric shadow, and I'm going to take this volumetric scatter intensity up to something like, again, 80. So you can look here through the window. You can see these light shafts that are being produced by the light volumetric fog that's coming from the light being projected through the window. So here now, if I just clear this search and I adjust my light color, we should kind of see that effect slightly more pronounced. And we can also adjust the actual intensity of the light to kind of see that effect become a bit more obvious. Right, so you can see here just by adjusting this light and the angle of the light that I'm getting these light shafts to come through that window.
What about it is volumetric? Like, what does that mean?
It's an actual volume of fog. It's like actually 3D fog. It's not just 2D sprites. It's a full 3D effect. There's an actual full 3D in all axes. It's a full out effect within this volume.
Are other fogs then just?
It's usually just 2D
functional
sprites.
axes?
It's usually just 2D sprites. This fills the entire environment with fog. There's no sprites, like you can't go behind it and see anything behind the fog. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm going to grab my directional light, and I'm just going to take my directional light intensity, and I'll just bring it down to something lower, like maybe 0.5. And I'll take my skylight, all right, and I'll take my skylight intensity down to something low again, like 0.1 maybe, just so that most of my light that I have is coming from this volumetric spotlight. Okay, so I'm taking my directional light and I'm gonna take the intensity of that way down. So the directional light is the one that's called light source. So here now, all I have is the lights that are coming from these volumetric lights. And then again, I could take down my intensity of my point light and adjust some of these colors. Get something a little neon. And I'll bring up the intensity of the volumetric scatter. And now I'm just duplicating this effect just to kind of see how soft of a lighting effect we can get. So for example, if we wanted to come in here and grab our ceiling lamp, so if we drag the ceiling lamp into the scene, okay, so we can just take this, we can just move it up through the ceiling, just for the purpose of the demo. Okay, I'm just gonna delete one of these point lights, and I'm gonna grab the point light from the outside, and I'll just duplicate this. So guys, if you look here for a sec. So go ahead and grab a ceiling lamp. So there's two ways we can handle this light. One, we can use a point light. Now the problem with the point light is that it's going to bounce lighting upward equally in all directions, basically. Okay, so this is going to be going essentially in all directions at an equal intensity. All right, so instead what we're going to use is we're going to take the spotlight from the outside, and I'm just going to duplicate this into the room. All right. I'm going to angle this so that it's pointing 90 degrees downward. And you can check here under your rotation values just to make sure that this is at 90 degrees. Okay. So I'm just going to line it up with the light. Okay. And then on the right side here where it says outer cone angle, I'm just going to take that and open it to 80 degrees. We can actually go up to 90 on the right here. Okay, then I'm just going to move this up a little bit. And I'll take my intensity down, the intensity of the light. Okay, and then for this light, we can, again, just adjust the color just to see what result this light is giving us. So again, if I type VOL, I can go into my volumetric scatter intensity and just tone down the effect to something that you know, you actually want for this particular light. Now, another thing you're going to notice here with this light, or with the volumetric rather, is you're going to notice this edge here. Okay, so can you see up here?
Yeah.
This edge that we have? So this is the actual resolution of the volumetric, okay? So to get something that's a bit sharper, and again, this is gonna, you're gonna take a hit on performance for something like this. But I'm gonna hit the tilde key, so the key next to the 1. So it's gonna open this console on the bottom. Okay? So if I press the tilde, which is next to the 1 key up at the top, you're gonna notice this little command, this command line at the bottom. I'm gonna type grid pixel, and you're gonna find grid pixel size space 4. Okay, so set it to 4.
What?
So look up here. Look up here. So I'm gonna type grid pixel, and you're gonna find this one here, volumetric grid pixel size. Click that, and then space 4.
Enter?
So you should notice this line become a lot cleaner.
Oh, well, we can write the cancel out.
You guys getting that to work?
Do you know what it was before?
Sorry?
Do you know what the value was before?
It's at 8.
Build it.
So essentially we've just doubled the resolution of the grid pixel size. All right, you guys getting this to work? So, oh, another thing too, guys, down here now, you can also check what this looks like with your post. So now that you have this, you might want to look at readjusting your post here based on, you know, now that you have volumetric or you have a lighting pass, you might want to do an actual a color grade pass
Amazing.
once you have a more kind of final version of what your actual lighting is going to be.
This is great.
Okay, so I'll jump into Photoshop for a sec. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open that decal folder that we extracted to the desktop. And I'm going to grab road sign _ A and road sign _ C. And I'm just going to open both of those So underscore A and underscore C. Okay, so I'm going to look at the underscore A file for a sec. All right, so this is what's called a decal atlas. All right, so we have a few decals here that we can extract and we can use with our decal actors inside of Unreal. So we can use these to create some type of like stamping effect in the level, like, you know, under characters as like footprints, or if you guys had any type of combat scene, you can produce some type of like maybe damage decal on like a wall or the ground. You can create a bunch of interesting effects. So we'll just take a look at kind of how these work generally. So on the right side, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to hit M to switch to my marquee select tool. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything other than my hazard stripes in a new layer. So I'm just going to drag a marquee select. And then using my fill tool, I'm going to fill, my paint bucket tool, I'm going to fill this layer with black. Okay, so all I have visible here is just the stripes. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Save As. On my desktop, I'm going to save this as a Targa. And I'm going to call this underscore road sign underscore hazard underscore A underscore 01. All right, 24 bits per pixel is fine. All right, so in Unreal, back in my sample content folder, I'm going to hit import, and I'm going to import that underscore A. I'm also going to go back to import, and in the decals folder, I'll bring in the underscore C and the underscore R.
So all of them?
Not all of them,
Are you
just the one that we saved out.
unedited version of A or
No, the one that we just saved out. So we should have 3 textures that we just imported. So we imported the underscore color, the underscore alpha, and the underscore roughness. Okay. In the sample content folder, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new material. And I'm going to call this capital MAT underscore road sign underscore 01. Go ahead and double click that material. And let's bring in these 3 textures into that material. Okay, so we brought in these 3 textures into the material. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to multiply this texture sample. I'm going to hold 3 on the keyboard and bring in a 3 vector. Let's right click, convert that to a parameter, and call this color tint. Make sure you double click this and set each channel to 1, or just drag this slider here all the way to the top so that it's full 1 in each channel. So this should be entirely white. And this is going to go into the B of the multiply. I'm going to take this multiply and plug it into base color. I'm going to take this roughness and I'm going to put it through a multiply. Holding 1, I'm going to right click to bring in a 1 vector. Right click and convert that to a parameter and call this roughness. Set the default value for this to 1. And then plug this into B of the multiply. Plug that into roughness. Then you're going to take this alpha texture here and you're going to plug it into opacity and opacity mask. They're both grayed out at the moment, but you'll still be able to plug those up. And then we're actually going to adjust this so that it exposes these values in a second. Okay, next I'm going to click on the background in the material. On the left side of the screen, I'm going to change my material domain from surface to deferred decal. I'm going to switch my blend mode here from opaque to translucent. And I'm going to switch my decal blend mode to be whatever settings I'm actually using. So I'm going to use translucent color roughness. So translucent color roughness. Okay, then I'll hit save at the top left. Okay, in the level here, on the left side of the screen, in the modes panel, I'm going to search for a deferred decal actor and I'll drag that in. All right, so we can just kind of move this off to the side here. Let me just move this decal off to the side for a sec. And with this decal selected, okay, on the right side of the screen, we have this slot for decal material. So I'm going to grab this material I just created. I'm just going to drag and drop it into that slot there. So what I'm going to do here, using the scale tool, up on the right side of the screen, I like using these values sometimes for the scale, because one thing you don't want to do, or you want to avoid doing, is you want to avoid scaling too much on the actual up and down axis, because you can actually invert this decal. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set my values to something like maybe 0.5 by 0.5 by 0.5, just to get the scale of this down to something smaller. Then what you could do here, right, using the Alt tool, just kind of, or the Alt key, just duplicate this, and we can just line it up so that it kind of matches end on end. So it creates this kind of continuous hazard line here. Okay. If we go back into the material, you can see here now, in this material, right? So if you look up at my screen for a sec, and I'll grab one of these lights. Actually, I'll grab a point light. I'm just going to tone down some of this volumetric for a sec. So I'm just going to light this area up a little bit. All right. So we can see here now, right? If I go back into the material, so look up at my screen for a second, and I'll give you guys a moment to do this. So if you look up here, I can grab this color tint that we set up here. I can double click on this color, and I can set this to be whatever color I want now, because I have that color tint which is multiplying my actual base color. So we can set this to be any color we want. Also, what we could do, because we have that roughness multiplier, right, is I can go down to my roughness, and I can set this value to something that's lower, something like, let's say, 0, which will give me a pretty shiny effect. So you can see here, this is set to 1. It's pretty subtle in my screen here. Actually, look up here for a sec. I'm just going to bypass this multiply. It'll be a bit easier to see. So I'm just going to plug that right into the roughness. So if you look here for a sec, this is with the value at 1. This is with the value at 0. So you can go for something that's you know, somewhere in between those values. So go ahead and try that out.